79 years. For almost 8 decades, the bunker where Adolf Hitler spent his final days remained sealed. Thousands of tons of reinforced concrete and twisted metal debris buried the site. It stayed frozen in time. Researchers could not enter. Official silence protected the perimeter. Why was the site kept secret for so long? There was no simple answer. Fear of neo-Nazi pilgrimages played a part, but the historical value was undeniable. The rooms served as the command center for the final days of the Third Reich. When the doors finally opened, the scene was revealed. What survived in the depths? Investigators found desks, discarded maps, and personal items. They saw remnants of a life under siege. This was the exact location where the final decisions of the war were made. It was here that Hitler committed suicide. The bunker was not just a ruin, it was a witness to the collapse of a criminal regime. The footage shows dark corridors and rusted ventilation pipes. The air is heavy and damp. What secrets remained buried for 80 years? The objects revealed the reality of the end. There was no glory, only desperation and concrete. History and politics still collide over this ground. April 1945. Berlin was dying. The Soviet siege crushed the city. The Red Army crossed the Oder River at the end of January. Within weeks, they encircled the German capital. There was no turning back. The camera records, smoke rising over the Brandenburg Gate. Buildings are reduced to skeletons of brick and rebar. On the streets, the sound of Katyusha rockets is constant. Hitler retreated 30 feet underground. He moved into the Führerbunker. This was a complex of 30 rooms located beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. The walls were 13 feet thick. He didn't just hide. He directed ghosts. He moved imaginary armies on maps while the real soldiers died on the surface. The bunker became a tomb before the inhabitants were even dead. The collapse was total, January 16, 1945. On this day, Adolf Hitler left the surface of the earth for the last time. He descended into the Führerbunker, a reinforced concrete complex buried 50 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery. This move began his total isolation. From this date, he emerged only 3 times. His final appearance occurred on April 20th. It was his 56th birthday. He walked into the ruined Chancellery Gardens to award Iron Crosses to children from the Hitler Youth. The film footage captures the reality. Hitler appears visibly aged. His left hand tremors uncontrollably behind his back. His gaze is fixed on nothing. The bunker became a tomb before he was even dead. It was a labyrinth of narrow dormitories, functional offices, and heavy steel doors. Independent generators hummed constantly. Air filtration systems struggled to remove the smell of oil and sweat. There were no windows and no natural light. Only the hum of electric lamps and artificial ventilation remained. What was happening above ground? The city was a graveyard. Allied bombings had turned residential neighborhoods into mountains of pulverized brick. Electricity was gone. Water pipes had burst. The metro stations were packed with thousands of starving civilians. On the surface, the war moved house by house. Remnants of German units fought Soviet divisions in the ruins. On April 20th, the final pincer movement began. Marshal Georgy Zhukov attacked from the north. Marshal Ivan Konev pushed from the south. The encirclement was rapid. By April 23rd, Soviet troops reached the western suburbs. By April 25th, the capital was completely cut off. Berlin was now an island. Why did the high command stay? At first glance, there was a plan, but in reality, there was only collapse. Communications failed, radio signals flickered out, messengers died in the streets trying to cross Soviet lines. The reports reaching the bunker described a total military breakdown. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere turned toxic. Hitler sat in tactical meetings for hours. He moved imaginary units across paper maps. He issued orders to divisions that no longer existed. The generals watched in silence. The situation peaked on April 22nd. Hitler learned that an offensive by General Felix Steiner had failed to launch. Steiner had no tanks. He had no men. Hitler suffered a massive breakdown. He screamed at his staff for several minutes. He accused the military of mass treason. Then came the admission. He shouted that the war was lost. He stated that the end had arrived. there was no more talk of victory. There was only the sound of Soviet artillery vibrating through the concrete ceiling. The era was over. April 22, 1945. The breakdown was complete. Hitler realized his own commanders had betrayed him. After a massive outburst of anger, he made a public announcement to his inner circle. He would stay in Berlin until the end. He would die in the city. There were other options. Several close collaborators presented viable plans to escape to the south of Germany. They suggested moving to military facilities in Bavaria. Hitler refused. His decision was absolute. He would not leave the bunker. The following days brought total isolation. The world outside ceased to exist. Only a small group remained in the underground concrete rooms. This included Eva Braun, his companion since the mid-30s. Joseph Goebbels was there with his wife Magda and their 6 children. Martin Bormann, the head of the party chancellery, managed the internal logistics. Secretaries Traudl Junge, Gerda Christian, and Elsa Kruger handled the paperwork. Doctors Theodor Morell and Ludwig Stumpfeger remained on call. Armed SS guards stood at every door. April 28th. A new report arrived. Heinrich Himmler had betrayed the regime. He had attempted to negotiate a secret surrender with the Western Allies. Hitler had not authorized the move. The reaction was immediate. Hitler ordered Himmler's arrest. It was a blow from his most loyal subordinate of 20 years, but worse news followed. Reports confirmed Benito Mussolini had been executed in Italy. His corpse was on public display. Hitler read the details of the desecration. This was the final trigger. He would not be captured alive. He would not be a trophy. Between the night of April 28th and 29th, the work began. Hitler dictated 2 documents to Traudl Junge. The first was his political testament. In it, he justified every wartime decision. He blamed the Jews for the destruction of Europe. He named Karl Dönitz as president and Goebbels as chancellor. The second was a personal will. For the first time, he officially acknowledged Eva Braun. He declared his intention to marry her before the end. The ceremony happened in the early hours of April 29th. They used a small room in the bunker. Walter Wagner, a low-level party official, performed the service. Martin Bormann and Joseph Goebbels stood as witnesses. Eva Braun signed her name as Eva Hitler. The celebration was brief. There was no music, no ceremony. The kitchen staff prepared a small breakfast with champagne and cake. The mood was funeral. April 29th. Hitler reviewed the final documents. He gave precise instructions to his messengers. They were to take copies of the testament and leave the bunker immediately. They had to cross the Soviet lines. There was no turning back. 10 messengers. That was the final count of those who attempted to cross Soviet lines to reach German territory. Some failed. Others successfully delivered the documents to various locations, ensuring the survival of the dictator's last records. April 30th, 1945. Hitler ate breakfast with his secretaries in silence. No grand speeches, no maps of victory. Later, he met with military officers for one final tactical evaluation. The report was grim. There was no organized battlefront left. Multiple Soviet divisions had completely surrounded the center of Berlin. The Red Army was systematically advancing toward the Chancellery complex. Distance was now measured in blocks, not miles. In the early afternoon, the farewells began. Hitler shook hands with members of his closest circle. He spoke to them individually. There were no long goodbyes. Shortly after, he retired to his private quarters. Eva Braun followed him. The heavy door closed. 2 men waited in the outer hallway. Personal valet Heinz Linge and Martin Bormann. They looked at their watches. At approximately 3 hours and 30 minutes in the afternoon, a sharp crack echoed through the hallway. A single gunshot. They entered the room immediately. The air smelled of burnt powder and bitter almonds. Hitler sat on the sofa. A bullet wound was visible in his right temple. Eva Braun lay next to him, dead from cyanide poisoning. Hitler had taken no chances. He ingested a cyanide capsule before pulling the trigger of his Walther PPK pistol. The scene was static. On the floor lay the weapon and several small jars that once held the poison. The plan moved to the next phase. Following strict previous instructions, aides wrapped the bodies in heavy military blankets. They carried the remains up the stairs and into the Chancellery gardens. The sound of explosions was constant. The soldiers placed the bodies in a deep crater. A Soviet bomb had created the hole earlier that day. They poured gasoline from several drums stored in the bunker onto the blankets. A match was struck. Fire engulfed the remains, but the incineration was incomplete. Constant Soviet shelling forced the aides to seek cover, and the fuel supply ran dry. Only charred, partial remains were left in the dirt. The process of destruction had failed. Thus ended the Third Reich. May 1st, 1945. The ground above the bunker was a wasteland of scorched earth and craters. Artillery shells had churned the soil, burying charred debris under layers of fresh dirt. Inside the concrete walls, Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda reached a final decision. They did not plan an escape. They summoned the doctor, Ludwig Stumpfegger. The process was systematic. 6 children were given cyanide capsules. Once the children were dead, the parents walked up the stairs and into the bunker garden. 2 gunshots echoed. Goebbels and his wife lay dead on the gravel. Bunker personnel carried out the final order. They poured gasoline over the corpses and set them on fire. With the Goebbels family gone, Martin Bormann took control. He was now the highest authority in the underground complex, but his command lasted only hours. Within days, Bormann attempted to break through the Soviet lines and vanished. He was never seen alive again. May 2nd, 1945. Soviet troops reached the government district. The Reich Chancellery was no longer a palace. The camera would show a mountain of smoldering ruins. Heavy artillery had cracked the bunker's concrete shell. In the garden, Red Army soldiers moved through the smoke. They found what they were looking for. Scattered among the debris were charred human remains. SMERSH, the Soviet counterintelligence unit, took over the site. They didn't just look, they sifted through the ash. Their report listed the findings: bone fragments, a damaged skull, and several dental bridges. How did they prove the identity? It wasn't guesswork. Hitler's personal dentist Hugo Blaschke had kept meticulous records. The Soviets tracked down his assistant, Katha Heusermann. They showed her the dental pieces. She recognized the work immediately. She had assisted in the treatments herself. The interrogation was long and detailed. The Soviets had their confirmation, but they did not tell the world. Instead, they moved the remains to military facilities in Magdeburg. The bones were placed in top-secret archives. For decades, they stayed under armed guard, but the bodies didn't rest. Soviet authorities buried and exhumed the remains repeatedly. They moved the crates from one secret location to another. It was a systematic effort to keep the evidence hidden. Why the secrecy? Stalin wanted control over the narrative. The official Soviet reports were a mess of contradictions. One day they claimed he was dead. The next, they hinted he was hiding in Spain or Argentina. This ambiguity was deliberate. It fueled decades of rumors and conspiracy theories. At first glance, the fate of the dictator was a mystery. But in reality, the evidence was conclusive. The physical remains and the dental matches proved it. Adolf Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945. International public opinion remained skeptical. This was the result of Soviet silence. They held the truth behind a curtain of iron. While the world wondered, the bunker remained beneath the Berlin soil. The Soviets tried to blow it up, but the concrete was too thick. They sealed the entrances with steel and earth. The Red Army established a permanent military zone around the site. No one was allowed near the ruins. The site became a void on the map. The story ended in silence. The cursed bunker was transformed into a tomb of concrete and secrecy. No markers were left behind, only the records remained. 1936. Berlin begins a massive urban modernization for the Summer Olympic Games. At the center of the city, the Reich Chancellery undergoes expansion. Workers dig beneath the main garden on Vossstrasse. This is the birth of the Führerbunker. What was its original purpose? It was not a fortress. It was an elementary air raid shelter. The concrete walls were only 1 meter thick. Access was simple. A staircase led from the Chancellery basement down into the small complex. It was designed for short alerts, not for living underground. But the situation changed. September 1939. The war begins. Soon, British and American bombers appear over the capital. The frequency of the raids increases every month. The thin walls of the Führerbunker are no longer safe. Events accelerated. By 1943, the Luftwaffe had lost control of the skies. Allied bombs were leveling the city above. Hitler issued a direct order. He demanded a deeper, stronger shelter. It had to be a fortress capable of surviving a direct hit. The company Hochtief took the contract. They were specialists in the regime's massive construction projects. Engineers from the Chancellery Construction Office took command, but the labor was not voluntary. The footage from the era is clear. Thousands of forced laborers were brought to the site, Soviet prisoners of war, political detainees from concentration camps, workers from occupied territories. They worked 12-hour shifts without a break. The conditions were lethal. Malnutrition was the norm. Disease spread through the cramped excavations. SS guards maintained discipline with boots and batons. Records are fragmentary, but the reality is known. Dozens died pouring the concrete and digging the earth. Their bodies were replaced by new prisoners. The final structure reached a depth of 8 meters. This was the Führerbunker. The walls were massive, 2.5 meters of reinforced concrete on the sides, 3.5 meters on the ceiling. The camera moves through the layout. 18 rooms, narrow corridors with sharp angles. Airtight steel doors seal every section. It was a pressurized tomb. The machinery was advanced. The bunker had its own life support. Filters protected against combat gases. Potable water tanks lined the walls. Autonomous electric generators roared in the background. Diesel fuel tanks ensured the lights stayed on for weeks. It was completely independent of the Berlin power grid. The complex was split into 2 distinct levels. The upper level was the old Führerbunker. It contained the kitchens and storage rooms. Auxiliary staff, secretaries, and administrative clerks slept here. The lower level was the core. This was the Führerbunker itself. It contained the private quarters for Hitler and Eva Braun. It also housed the military conference room. This was the heart of the dying regime. At first glance, it was a triumph of engineering, but in reality, it was a cage. The structure was finished. The era of the surface was over. 14 meters underground. This was the final fortress of the Third Reich. The layout included strategic map rooms, quarters for high-ranking officers, a fully equipped infirmary, and reinforced weaponry storages. Several emergency exits led to various points in the Chancellery Garden. By the final months of the war, rubble and collapses rendered most of these exits unusable. How did the interior look? It was not a palace, it was a tomb. The design followed strictly functional criteria. Rooms were small, ceilings were low, there were no windows. Acoustic plaster lined the walls to dampen the sound of footsteps and machinery. Electric lamps provided the only light, creating a perpetually artificial environment. The air stayed cold due to the depth and heavy insulation. Furniture was minimal. Iron beds, metal desks, and utilitarian work tables filled the cramped spaces. Adolf Hitler supervised the project personally. During his visits, he demanded constant modifications. He ordered the engineers to increase the thickness of the walls and reinforce every door with steel. He called for ventilation systems capable of filtering out chemical gas. He threatened the engineers with severe sanctions if they missed a single specification. His objective was clear. The bunker had to withstand the total collapse of the capital. Hitler did not view the structure as a simple refuge. He saw it as a nerve center. From here, he would direct the final military operations. If that failed, it would serve as the final stage of his life. His office contained large format maps and specialized communication systems. His private suite included a living room, a bedroom, and immediate access to a secret emergency exit. The layout combined military command with personal security. In theory, the bunker could house 30 people for several weeks, but in the final days of April 1945, the population surged. More than 40 individuals crowded the hallways. This group included ministers, doctors, secretaries, and armed escorts. The saturation of space increased the tension. On the surface, constant bombings shook the concrete. Inside, the occupants suffered through prolonged confinement and stale, filtered air. Underground tunnels linked the Führerbunker with the Chancellery and the Führerbunker. During the last battles, Soviet projectiles obstructed these accesses. The main corridor remained operational only because of reinforced metal gates. These gates acted as a final barrier against enemy incursions. By the end of 1944, the construction was complete. In January of 1945, Hitler moved into the bunker permanently. He was convinced that Berlin would be the site of the final battle. The complex had transformed from an auxiliary shelter into the most protected space in the city. The walls were designed to withstand large-caliber explosives. Instead, they became the physical boundary of Hitler's isolation. This concrete fortress was built through technical planning and forced labor. It represented the final decline of a regime. Thus ended the Reich. Europe was at war. This was the final act. May 2nd, 1945. After days of non-stop urban combat, the Red Army reached the Reich Chancellery. Soviet units broke into the center of the Berlin government district and crushed the last German defenses. The complex was a ruin. The buildings were half destroyed. The gardens were fields of deep craters. Human remains lay scattered across the concrete. Most high-ranking Nazi officials were already dead or missing. The corridors were nearly empty. Only a few prisoners and abandoned corpses remained. The first soldiers arrived. They belonged to the 79th Guards Rifle Corps. General Vasily Chuikov led the operation. Near an underground exit, the soldiers found a shallow crater. Inside were charred remains buried in haste. These were the bodies of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. Identification was difficult. The fire had been incomplete. The soldiers found only partial bone fragments, teeth, and pieces of a skull damaged by explosions. Why did the Soviets keep quiet? The evidence was there. But the truth was hidden behind a wall of silence. The discovery was too important for regular soldiers. SMERSH, the Soviet military counterintelligence, took control immediately. These teams began a systematic sweep. They gathered every human bone. They seized weapons and scorched documents. They took Morse transmission logs from late April and personal letters found in the bunker. Every item was packed into crates. The destination was Moscow. The teeth were the key. Specialists compared the bone fragments with existing medical records. Then came the interrogations. The Soviets found Kayla Häusermann. She was the assistant to Hitler's dentist, Hugo Blaschke. The footage shows Häusermann looks at the dental bridges. She identifies the specific dental work performed on the dictator. The match was perfect, there was no doubt. There, but the Soviet authorities did not speak. In the days following the fall of Berlin, they lied. They claimed publicly that there was no proof of Hitler's death. Internal reports confirmed the body was his, but the files were locked away. It got worse. The NKVD took the remains to Magdeburg. They burned the bodies a second time and buried the ashes in secret. The location was classified. This was not a mistake. It was a strategy ordered by Joseph Stalin himself. Stalin saw uncertainty as a weapon. Uncertainty created fear. July 1945, the Potsdam Conference. Stalin sat across from Harry Truman and Winston Churchill. He told them Hitler might have escaped to Spain or Argentina. He looked them in the eye and lied. His own intelligence services, SMERSH and the NKVD, had the physical proof in their vaults. Stalin ignored it. The dictator wanted a ghost to haunt the West. The truth stayed buried for decades. The files remained closed. The red silence was complete. Soviet officials possessed eyewitness testimonies and conclusive dental records. They kept these documents hidden. It was a deliberate act of disinformation. The goal was to manufacture tension among the Allies and sow doubt regarding the fate of the dictator. Moscow wanted to be the sole owner of the truth. Why hide the facts? To maintain control over the narrative. The Soviet Union turned a historical event into a weapon of psychological warfare. During the summer of 1945, the Soviet press published contradictory reports. One newspaper claimed he died in Berlin. Another suggested he fled to Spain. Other versions placed him in South America or Asia. Rumors circulated about his presence in Argentina, Japan, and even Tibetan monasteries. These stories lacked any physical evidence. But the international media took the bait. Western intelligence agencies recorded hundreds of supposed sightings. Every report was filed. Every tip was investigated. The Soviet silence gave these impossible theories a sense of credibility. The mystery grew. The state of the physical remains added to the confusion. The fragments were incomplete. A skull fragment attributed to the dictator showed damage that did not match witness descriptions. No Western researcher could examine the evidence. Moscow kept the pieces under strict secrecy. The dental remains were locked in secret archives. They remained hidden for decades. The KGB maintained custody of the bone fragments in a secure vault. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union were these items exhibited to a limited audience. This lack of transparency allowed survival myths to take root in popular culture. The footage from the era shows the chaos. Western intelligence services in the United States, Great Britain, and France continued to gather sighting reports. Some placed him in Spain under the protection of Franco. Others placed him in German colonies in Argentina. The lack of a Soviet confirmation fueled the fire. It got worse. Even during the Nuremberg trials, the truth remained buried. Several high-ranking Nazi leaders testified that the dictator died in the bunker. The international community remained unconvinced. Headlines were a mess of contradictions. One day, he was dead. The next day, he was hiding in the mountains. Inside the Soviet Union, the remains became a matter of national security. In 1946, soldiers moved the boxes to Magdeburg. They buried the remains deep within a military facility. 24 years passed. In 1970, the situation changed. The Soviet Union prepared to transfer the military site to the German Democratic Republic. They could not leave the evidence behind. The KGB launched a final mission. They exhumed the remains under the cover of night. Every bone was burned until only ash remained. The soldiers drove to the Biederitz Bridge and threw the ashes into the Elbe River. There was no ceremony. The goal was simple: total erasure. They wanted to prevent any future site from becoming a shrine for followers. The story ended in the water. Thus, the physical evidence of the Third Reich's leader vanished forever. 1947, 2 years after the German surrender. Soviet engineers moved into the ruins of the Reich Chancellery. Their mission was clear: erase the Führerbunker from the map. The surface of Berlin was a wasteland of twisted metal and brick. But underground, the bunker remained intact. It was more than a building. It was a potential shrine for Nazi sympathizers. To prevent this, the Red Army prepared a massive demolition. Soldiers hauled crates of explosives into the depths. They rigged charges against the reinforced concrete. The Führerbunker, located closer to the surface, crumbled under the blast. But the main Führerbunker was different. It sat deep in the earth, protected by 4-meter-thick walls. The explosion shook the district. Dust clouds rose from the craters, but when the smoke cleared, the structure stood. The roof had cracked and some rooms collapsed, but the heart of the bunker remained. The demolition had failed. What did the Soviets do next? They changed tactics. Since they could not destroy it, they would bury it. Orders came from the Kremlin to seal every entrance. Construction crews poured tons of concrete and debris into the stairwells. They established a restricted perimeter. Armed guards patrolled the site 24 hours a day. No one went in. No one took photos. In the Soviet archives, the secrets were even deeper. Stalin's agents had seized every scrap of paper from the bunker: transmission records, final orders, emergency telegrams to fleeing generals. All of it became a state secret. Why did the Soviet Union hide the truth? They had the forensic evidence, they had the dental bridges, they knew Hitler was dead. But they chose to lie. The footage from the era shows empty corridors and rubble, but the official reports told a different story. Moscow deliberately spread rumors that Hitler had escaped to South America or Spain. It was a psychological weapon. By keeping the question open, they kept the West off balance. This ambiguity served a specific purpose. In the Soviet occupation zone, it was a tool of control. If Hitler might still be alive, the threat of Nazism remained. If the threat remained, the Soviet military presence was justified. For the German people, this was a period of forced uncertainty. Without a body or a final report, the regime felt unfinished. The lack of clarity fueled decades of myths. Writers and journalists exploited the vacuum. They published books based on fake testimonies and unverified rumors. A shadow fell over the site for 70 years. The ruins were buried, and the truth was locked in steel cabinets. The Soviet Union possessed the proof from the start, but they preferred the legend. It was a political game played with the ghost of a dictator. The area remained under direct military custody. Grass grew over the concrete slabs. The world moved on, but the bunker stayed beneath the dirt. The story ended in silence. Berlin, 1949. The ruins on the surface were visible to every citizen, but the doors remained locked. No one was allowed inside. Local memory kept the location of the complex alive, yet the public was strictly barred from the site. With the birth of the German Democratic Republic, the new socialist state took control. A new order was issued, erase the physical remnants of Nazism. The Führerbunker was a political landmine. Authorities feared it would become a shrine for neo-Nazi sympathizers. It was a symbolic stain in the heart of the GDR capital. To solve this, the government took direct action. Workers cleared the visible debris. They pumped layers of heavy building materials and liquid concrete into the access tunnels. They sealed the entrance. The erasure moved to the desks of bureaucrats. On official maps, Vossstrasse was redrawn with fake coordinates. The land registry was scrubbed. All mentions of the bunker vanished from the files. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the concealment deepened. Documents were pulled from state archives. Files were classified as restricted or burned. Urban planners were given a specific mission. They designed administrative buildings and massive apartment blocks to sit directly on top of the ruins. The goal was simple: neutralize the symbolic value of the site. In the official records, the land was listed as an ordinary city plot. It had no history, it had no name, but the plan had a flaw. People remembered. Construction workers who poured the concrete began to talk. Decades later, they described finding walls that appeared on no architectural plans. They found sealed chambers and skeletal remains mixed with rotted military wool. The smell of damp concrete and old uniforms filled the air. The project managers gave a single order: remove everything immediately. No photographs were allowed. No official reports were filed. Some workers spoke of words scratched into the walls. Words like lost or mercy. These claims were never verified. These stories spread through whispers and clandestine interviews with Western journalists. The rumors grew, but the state remained silent. In the 1970s, the GDR increased the pressure. Neo-Nazi movements were rising in Western Europe. The fear of a pilgrimage site became an obsession for the secret police. They reinforced the area with more residential blocks. Academic research into the site was made illegal. Historians were blocked. Requests for access were denied without explanation. The bunker became a taboo. It was a hole in the city's history that no one was allowed to mention. However, the local residents of the district watched the new construction with resentment. They knew what lay beneath the new foundations. The secret was buried under tons of reinforced concrete. Thus ended the official record.